The inspiration for this episode actually came by in such an interesting way. Just so you get how my mind works. Originally, there's this song that I love. It's called Kintsugi. It's a French R&B song. Now, fast forward, I've been reading this book series. I don't want to get into the whole topic of the series. But anyways, as I'm reading this series, I start to think of this concept of Kintsugi. And that's how we're here today. So once I had that spark of inspiration, I did a little bit more research and I just felt I had a lot to talk about. So today we're going to talk about the concept of kintsugi. Kintsugi is actually a twofold thing. At its basis, it is a form of pottery, and essentially it's mending broken pottery with gold. So, like, say you broke a pot and it cracked into like 5 big pieces. Instead of throwing away that pot, you would mend the pot by filling the cracks with gold. Interestingly, there's a whole philosophy behind this practice, and the philosophy behind it is essentially embracing your flaws instead of trying to hide them. Because in essence, they believe that your flaws make you unique, not broken, not flawed. And so, anyways, in this book series, a lot of the characters are deeply flawed and essentially struggle with a sense of unworthiness. And these characters go through this journey of finding worthiness and I feel it's such a impactful example of being human, of how our inner narrative can oftentimes completely change everything. And I guess maybe there's a pattern in the themes that I was reading about subconsciously, but it just made me think about the fact that you really are your own enemy sometimes. And it's so interesting because when things apply in your own life, it's so much harder to see the nuances of your experience or to see the domino effect behind certain thoughts or actions. And when something is sparked by our thoughts, oftentimes we don't have the self awareness to see how it plays out in our actions. Let me give you an example to make this less metaphorical and more tangible. In this book series, for a good portion of the beginning of the series, the two main characters both struggle with feelings of unworthiness for different reasons. And throughout their journey, you're able to see in so many instances where both the male and female characters completely misread a situation and act in a way that is not in their best interest because of their own personal fears. You can see time and time again how their own inner narrative completely taints their perception of an event or experience and leads them to both suffer for so much longer than they need to suffer because neither of them will embrace their imperfection. And you know what? The reality is we all feel like we're terrible people. I think we all feel on a certain level that we're terrible people. That if people only knew us in secret, they'd see that we're so deeply flawed. I think everyone feels that way in their loneliest and darkest of moments. And I think nobody really talks about it, not candidly, and so it eats you up inside. You're really not alone in your experiences. So many others have the fears that you won't even voice to yourself. And essentially, throughout this narrative, you kind of realize that perfection is an illusion and it's the flaws that tell the story. Which, you know what, is so true because if you think about people that you've loved in life, you don't love them for their perfection. You might admire someone for their perfection, but that is not why you love a person. You love a person because of their cracks and how all their cracks uniquely formed to make them who they are. And it's interesting because I struggle with perfectionism in the depth of who I am. I think it was always an armor I wore in my life. If I could just do the perfect thing and say the perfect thing and act in a perfect way or in a way that I could control, and if I could hide all my imperfections, then nothing can touch me and nothing can hurt me. And that mentality, what it ended up doing is alienating everyone from me. The reality is, human beings are not drawn to perfection, especially not in the soul's that they choose to love. You love someone for all the ways that they are deeply flawed and for all the ways that they are trying. I was just thinking about how it's so interesting how convoluted our society is when the basis of love is imperfection, yet everything we're told to do is strive for perfection. And I saw this in my own life. Let me tell you one thing about me. Everything about who I am has been finely curated. And I had been on this perfectionism autopilot, I think, for so long that I'll be truthful with you. It kind of scares me. It makes me sometimes wonder, do I know who I am? So much I did was for the eyes of others and the approval of others. How do I know what parts of me are really me and what parts of me are an act? The scary part about it is you slip on a mask so often that eventually you forget that you're wearing a mask, but something doesn't feel right. It's like having a word at the tip of your tongue. You're wearing a mask and you something feels uncomfortable or not right, but you cannot pinpoint what it is. It's just out of your reach. And what this ended up doing is it made me feel so lonely. And I don't think I saw an issue with this behavior for a long time because I didn't date until I was a lot older. And in less intimate relationships, close friends, acquaintances, colleagues, the mask rarely ever slips. You don't spend enough time with a lot of people for that mask to slip. And I only started to realize that this was a major issue in my life when it was brought to my attention that I keep them at arm's length, that I never actually let them get to know me, which I never understood before. Like when I first got that comment, I didn't understand it because I had been wearing a mask for so long. I was convincing myself of my own show. But the truth was, I never talked about my feelings. I never gave them anything that could show weakness in me. I wouldn't say I like them or I care about them or I miss them. I wouldn't share any intimate details about my life or my fears or my worries or the things that excite me. Anything I felt that could be used against me or hurt me, I didn't share. Frankly, looking back at it, I don't know how I didn't realize this because if you're gonna do that, then there's actually no point in being in a relationship. Because the whole essence of opening your heart to love someone is to be vulnerable and accept the possibility of being hurt because you give that person access to something very valuable to you, your heart, and they can break it. But at that time, I don't know. I have this ability to make people feel that they're closer to me than they actually are. This is not a conscious thing. It's just that I guess the things that I'm open to talk about are things that maybe some people feel shy to talk about. But then the things other people find normal to talk about, I can't talk about. But because I'm able to talk about the more extreme things, people just think they know me better. Like, for example, I can easily talk about how I had an eating disorder or all the crap that I went through in school. But then if you ask me, how are you doing today? How are you doing this month? What's going on with you? Are you mad at me? It's like, I don't know how to explain that there are no words. Like, immediately I say I'm good. And even if I want so badly to open myself up, it's like my tongue ceases to have muscles. I get stuck. And so, anyways, eventually I realized that I, in fact, never give people the opportunity to get to know me. And at the core of it all, why I was trying to be perfect is because I wanted so desperately to be loved and accepted. There were many complicated factors in my childhood. Like, there was a lot of love in my house, but there were a lot of auxiliary factors, many things that I also don't feel like getting into. But I didn't have a lot of stable, unconditional love as a child. The love I was afforded as a child was always conditional, regardless of the best of intentions of the people around me. That was what it was. I have no judgment or resentment. It just was what it was. Okay, so I developed this tool because I realized if I acted in the way that people wanted me to act, and if I presented in a way that people liked, I would experience less friction in my life. Because my whole life for so long was so much chaos and fighting and friction that I just wanted it all to stop. I lost myself in being perfect. And I think it started from a good place. It started from a place of I wanted to improve myself. But then I noticed how people changed based on how I acted. What I wore, how soft my voice was, eye contact, how put together I was. I mean, there were so many minute details that I realized completely alter the way people perceive you. And so I became obsessed with fine tuning every minute detail of who I was to be as perfect as possible so that I would be loved. This was my thought process as a kid. And I think to an extent, it's actually even part of my thought process now, though it's so subconscious. This is the problem I think we have is it's so hard to be conscious. It's so hard to take the step from being conscious of your negative behaviors and thought patterns and then actually deploying better thought patterns because again, things become so visceral. But the reality is, when I would pay attention, I'd notice so many small ways in which I conformed and refined myself based on the people around me to be the most cohesive. Yet, no matter how perfect I became, I never felt loved. I never felt cared for or seen or supported. I felt like nobody saw me or understood me. But again, like I was playing such a big role in that because I was hiding all my flaws, all the cracks in my cup. I didn't mend them with care. I just hid them. And this topic was perplexing me for quite some time. It was perplexing me that people always felt closer to me than I felt to them. It really bothered me. And I guess it comes with age, and I guess a bunch of different things might have impacted my coming to this realization. But what I realized is that feeling close to someone does not occur by them sharing something with you. It occurs by you sharing something with them. Closeness, I realize, comes from vulnerability. So I guess that was the spark that ignited the flame for me. Realizing that very, very obvious, yet completely hidden from me idea that love, in fact, comes from vulnerability. And I couldn't reconcile that because growing up, I felt that people loved me more when I was perfect. And I guess to an extent, it can seem true because you never spend enough time with most people to be severely impacted by this, I guess. I think when people see a perfect thing, especially a seemingly perfect person, because I don't think anyone is perfect, it actually might seem amazing at first, but then you feel as if you cannot connect with this person, that there is no depth to that connection. And I always felt I lacked the depth with my connections in past, and I always blamed it on the other person. And not until last year did I realize, regardless of the other person, even if they were the best person in the world, I didn't step up and show up the way I should have. I never allowed myself to be vulnerable. I always left after the first major fight. I never admitted that someone hurt me. I never even let them know who I am at all. And listen, it was a sad life. It was a lonely, lonely life. And even after I came to this realization, even after I made the decision to act differently, it's not to say that things will be perfect if you're just vulnerable. Because you know what? Even though it was lonely and painful in a way, being perfect and keeping everyone's at arm's length, it was so unfulfilling it still felt safe because you were, I was in control of the facade. If they didn't like me, it's because they didn't like the facade, not because they didn't like the true me. I think once you start to be vulnerable and show the true mess that is you, it's much scarier because if a person rejects you or hurts you, you have to accept that they hurt you and rejected you and not your facade. So for a long time, I thought I was heartless because it didn't hurt when things ended. But in reality, it's because I never opened my heart to begin with. And because I put on a facade, so it didn't feel as personal that they didn't like who I was. They just didn't like the character I was playing. And this is how humans are also so convoluted because all I wanted was love, and yet I couldn't let a goddamn person look at me. The second a person started to see my cracks, I left. And being vulnerable and open, it's also painful and it might not work out the way that you want it to work out because I made the decision to act with the philosophy of kintsugi without actually knowing what it was, right? To accept my cracks as part of who I am and be vulnerable. It was after I had just broken up with my ex and decided that the next person that I meet, I'm just going to be 100% honest with them about everything. I don't know how to explain that switch, but I just approached that relationship completely differently. I was so honest and raw and vulnerable in a way that I've never been with any person ever. And, it made me feel naked and scared and overwhelmed. And I wasn't perfect. But I think at that point, I had never been deeply hurt. So I still had almost a naivety that if a person shows you who they are at such a level, there's no way that they could betray you. This is an age thing, right? So, anyways, I showed all my broken bits, and he still betrayed me in a way that I hope no one ever experiences in their life. And what I found so interesting is I would have expected myself to believe after this point that being vulnerable is a horrible idea. I should never be vulnerable again because that heartbreak literally did something to me that's irrevocable, that changed me completely and fundamentally. Yet, even at the height of my pain, I realized that the cracks that I showed were not the reason that he betrayed me. I was able to see because I was vulnerable and he was vulnerable that the hurt that he inflicted on me was a reflection of his own cracks and pains that he never really embraced. And it's a great example of what I was saying, that he didn't embrace these flaws as part of who he is and as a good thing that makes him more unique and beautiful. Instead, he saw these flaws and scars as something that left him unworthy of me. And so, because he felt in a way unworthy, he sabotaged everything. But again, I would have never even had that insight had I not been open with him. If I didn't take that leap of faith, it took me months and months and months to heal that ache. And in ways, I'm still healing it. But I really believe I am a more beautiful person because of it. I don't see what happened between us as a mark of failure or a mark of my unworthiness. The whole situation just made me sad because I recognized, I guess, his actions for what they were. Even though they hurt me and everything, I recognized them for what they were because we had reached that level of intimacy. But what's interesting is that I then met someone quite a while after him. I was still actually very upset about everything that happened with him. I decided to go out without any intention to meet anyone. I just want to be distracted from my feelings. I'm tired of feeling sad. I just want to go out and listen to some music and have fun. And I meet someone. And it's interesting because this person is honestly unimportant in the grand scheme of things. But this was the first person I'd opened myself up to after being so deeply hurt. And it's crazy to me because while I do accept that all the vulnerability that I showed with my ex was not wasted, there's a whole new facet of who I am now based on the pain and scars that now developed from that relationship. And I guess what I'm struggling with now is accepting the cracks in the moment. It's interesting because, again, with this idea of perfectionism, it's very easy to address the cracks that were so deep in your past that they no longer actively affect you. So you feel that you can bear them with a mark of pride that you've moved past them. But then in the moment, the cracks that are forming in the moment or that you have not yet filled, it's much harder, I think, to acknowledge and embrace those cracks. So, what I didn't expect when I met this person, in a way I did, okay? In a way I did expect that I was going to have a reaction that I wasn't sure what it would be, but I knew that I wouldn't react the same way as I have in past because all trust in another person has been lost. My ex had lied to me so masterfully that I found I don't trust anyone or anything they say. And I knew this and I made this very clear. Okay. Anyways, I think when things manifested the way they did and as intensely as they did, and the scars that I bear from that past relationship flared so hotly from such a random, inconsequential person, it made me realize that I had fallen back into old patterns because even till this day, although I can consciously recognize that the right person would have given me grace, there's still that voice in my head that's like, this is why you don't show people your scars. It made me feel ashamed that I haven't mended those scars, even though I was deeply betrayed by the first man I'd ever loved. And that will take a lot of time. And even though I expressed all of this to this person, I think neither they nor I truly realized how much and how deeply this in fact did affect me. Because immediately, like the second I started feeling anything towards this person, the facade went up. I felt like I was crazy, like I was acting in a way completely outside of how I would normally act. But I was like, well, this is how people act. This is how people act. Like I was taking advice from other people, not acting intuitively because I didn't trust myself or my own reactions. But at the end of the day, how I acted and I reacted was a temper tantrum because I was so scared, you know? I was so scared of the feelings that this person brought up and how they could break me. And so I sabotaged things in this case. There's an argument on the other person's end either, but that's irrelevant. The point being, though, I recognized in myself that it's a very different thing to embrace the cracks that you already have filled and then to embrace the ones that you're still mending. I think it's very hard to admit to yourself that there are a lot of parts of you that are still mending. And I think that when you don't admit that to yourself and embrace that, then the second somebody else triggers something in you, you will act in a way that's rooted out of shame and fear. It's what happened to me. I didn't realize it, not at the time, but I was so afraid of anyone ever catching my heart again. Even though consciously I said I wasn't. And it does come from, I guess, I don't know if it's a sense of unworthiness or if it's a sense of control. I think perfectionism is also a form of control. If you feel that you don't have control over a given situation, especially if you have anxiety, it can be unfathomable to go through that experience. But the truth is, in life, especially in relationships of any kind, people aren't necessarily going to spell things out for you. And there's a lot of trust in the process that you have to have, and trust in another person that you have to have. And if you have this fear in you that is so deep seated, it's almost like at least if you sabotage the thing, you're still controlling the outcome, which is better than not sabotaging the thing and then in essence waiting for your heart to be broken. So then how do you embrace those imperfections? Honestly, I don't know. This is one of the questions that I'm actively trying to answer right now. It's when you've spent your life for so long acting to appease others and to control the narrative others have of you, you lose the narrative of yourself and you begin to not know how to act. And you come to believe that there is a set way in which you should act. Because in perfectionism, there's a perfect way and there's all the other ways. So, of course, if you think there's a perfect way to act, then you think there's a singular way to act. Yeah, you end up just trapping yourself because you act so sporadically or you act so hesitantly or you don't act at all because you have this need for perfection when in reality all these opportunities just pass you by because you act prematurely based on a reaction to your own narrative and fears instead of based on the reaction to the evidence in front of you. Because let's say in this experience I had after my ex, because this is the only experience I've had since my ex, I had such a fear that he was lying to me. I was trying to catch him out on anything. I was suspicious of everything, which nobody likes to feel that way, that someone is suspicious of everything. And so I pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. He was, a sweet guy. Didn't give me any reason necessarily not to believe him. I could have waited for time to tell. But instead, I took the not great part as, okay, obviously there's someone else or he's lying. I guess in essence, it's much easier to accept the hurt that's already been healed than the hurt that still stings and aches. The cracks that have already been mended and not the cracks that are still buckling under pressure. Because many of the things in my life that have shaped who I am and how I move, but those aren't the things that kept me up when things didn't work out. It was the fact that I felt ashamed of how I behaved because I was reacting out of fear and hurt, which nothing is one sided in my side. I felt that I just wasn't willing to be vulnerable again and communicate how scared I was of everything because I felt like I'd already explained that. And it's much easier to explain that before the person hurts you than to explain it while you're actively being hurt by someone, even if they don't have bad intentions. And so I defaulted to a sense of perfectionism and I deflected all the blame on him. You're doing this, you're doing that, you're doing that. Yes, later I apologized, but it was kind of too late by then. I think both of us too many wrongs at that point because we're both kind of hurting and broken. Like even with him, he's got his own things too, and those things also impacted how he reacted and how he acted. And I realized, that the pot will never be mended. No matter how much you mend the cracks, it is not a sign of failure if new cracks keep forming. It's a sign of growth. It's a sign of life. It's a sign of evolution. If you never allow another crack to form, i.e., never allow another person to get close enough to hurt you or take the risk that might hurt you, then you are stagnant. That each new crack is not a sign of weakness, but a sign of resilience. And that you have an obligation to honor and respect the time it takes to mend those cracks and to have people in your life that will honor and respect that too. Because it doesn't matter if it's a TV show, if it's your own life, if it's your friends or your parents or your extended family or a book. This theme is so obvious and prevalent everywhere we look. And we're all smart enough to easily recognize how that's an issue, right? When we watch other people, then it comes to ourselves and we are blinded. We are so blinded to ourselves sometimes and so harsh on ourselves. We find it very easy to accept the imperfections in others, but refuse to accept the imperfections in ourselves. And it's very complicated to understand because I can wholeheartedly say, I believe other people that are flawed are only more beautiful because of it. I admire the people that can be vulnerable, that can cry, that can talk about their feelings and express themselves. I'm actually really envious of people who can express their emotions so openly and so freely because that shows such an attunement to how they feel. However, the moment I express any emotion, frustration, anger, sadness, whatever it might be, oftentimes presenting as anger though, to, mask the hurt. But when I try to express myself, whether it be sadness or frustration or irritation or hurt, I can't. I feel so ashamed if I break down in front of people. Like I just want to rip off my skin and cease to exist. And if there are people in my life that push me to talk about my feelings, I get so scared and so overwhelmed. I have this instinctual response to fight, to be angry. And because I refuse to let people see when there are still cracks that need to be mended. And maybe that stems from things like that being used against me in my life. Maybe it stems from social media. Maybe it stems from something I don't remember about my past. God honestly knows. But regardless of what it stems from, the reality is it's impacting my life and I need to change that. But then the question is, how do you change something when you've never had an example of any better way to do things? How do you learn how to embrace your cracks as you're mending them when no experience in your life has shown you that you can be vulnerable like that without being hurt? That your heart will not be handled carelessly when all your life your heart has been handled carelessly. But then does it come to who you're picking? Is that the issue? Is it who I'm picking? Maybe in part. I'm not sure. All I know is that I'm really trying to practice this concept of kintsugi because I think I'm at a precipice of monumental change. Because in this moment, I don't even know how to act or how to be. I feel like I'm shedding all the skin of that perfectionism that I had, that I almost don't know how to disentangle who I was, who I am, what really me, and what was the facade. Did the facade become me? How do I express my emotions? How do I just be who I am? Who even am I? How many cracks do I have to fill? How do I allow myself to be so naked and vulnerable and show my current pain when the first time I ever really allowed myself to do that, I was betrayed so deeply? These are the questions on my mind because I do recognize I have to find a way to move forward. And I do recognize that regardless of the other person's actions and responsibilities, I also played a big role in that, in my actions and how I communicated that wasn't healthy or fair. It's like what to do when there's no one to tell you what to do and there's no right way to do a thing. Especially something like this that is so subjective and so even in books they talk about it. There's no right way to act or be in things that are so intimate and personal and unique like this. Yet the perfectionist in my brain believes there is a certain way to act. And social media feeds this. There are videos talking about this, how you should act in a relationship, this how you should act in a talking stage, this is how you should act if you want them to love you, blah, 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 blah. And I think when you don't know any better, when you literally don't have any course of action, these can seem enticing. I even fell into that trap. Then I realized the people that are posting this don't even know what they're talking about. And so I started reading books, and I think the books really helped until I got my heart broken. And now I read the books almost embittered, like, yeah, okay, whatever, open your heart, but people still gonna break it. I don't know. It's not that I'm bitter though. I am positive that eventually I'll get out of this. But like I said in the last episode, when I see a problem, I want to be able to fix it. And it does truly bother me that there is not a formula of how to fix this issue and that there's not a formula to ensure that I'm embracing this concept of kintsugi because it seems so obviously correct. And I can say I believe it and I can advise my friends to follow it, I can advise the people in my life that it's a great concept and very whatever. But then in reality, so much of our emotional reactions are based on visceral response and instinct and not unconscious thought or behavior. And so, how do you change that? It's funny because the last episode I was talking about, you can only control your reactions and your actions, not other people's actions or reactions. And it's true, but there's so much nuance to it. Because while I do agree with those statements, I do agree it's true, it doesn't negate the fact that I still don't know what the course of action is. That while I can accept that embracing your flaws and seeing them as a sign of strength is a valuable idea, and I can even apply it to a certain extent to my past, there is a roadblock for me in my present. So I guess there's no answer from me for this. I mean, if you have an answer or a thought, please let me know because gods do I need to understand. But today's episode, there's no call to action. There's no really objective. I mean, this might not even make any sense, but this is the tangle of thoughts that I've been having in my head for the past couple of months. I haven't addressed it because I would prefer to have a solid conclusion and not show you the cracks as they're happening. Do you see what I mean? I've usually addressed it after I've, worked through it and I can be like, here's the solution that helped me, whatever. But you know what? In life, sometimes somebody is going to come to you and they're going to understand what you're feeling and going through, and they're not going to have a solution. And the best thing that they can offer you is the knowledge that somebody else feels the way you feel. And so I guess that's what today's episode is, an acknowledgement that how you feel is not crazy or out of bounds or irredeemable, that you can have complex and confounding beliefs and ideas, that you can believe a thing and still act in a different way because of your own fears, and that you won't always have the answer. Because I even realized with this podcast, I was in a way perpetuating that perfectionism too, because I only talked about things I'd already figured out. But all the things that have been plaguing me in the moment, I have not been able to talk about because I don't have a solution. I don't know how to fix it. It's an ongoing process. And I guess although this isn't intentional, this actually makes this episode even more relevant and more in tune with the topic, that you gotta show your cracks while you're mending them. These are the cracks I have. This is me mending them. This is the chaos in my brain as I try to understand a path forward, as I try to understand how to build a path forward. Truthfully, I feel as though I sound like a lunatic, that I overanalyze and overthink everything, and that all of this is not going to make sense or be relatable. But again, that's the fear. I think if this ever goes on air, know that this is so far outside of my comfort zone. We're not even in the same country anymore. However, I think that's part of life, is challenging yourself. And I think that the first step is to just do the thing that you're scared of. And I'm hoping, the positive side of my mind is hoping that other people will feel that they can relate to this. Because on a conscious level, I understand other people do feel this way. I've heard people talk about this with me and online. Yet somehow, whenever it comes to myself, I invalidate it. So anyways, this was maybe a messy episode with no conclusion and maybe no even solid thought. But I think it also reflects perfectly the essence of this episode's topic, which is kintsugi. That it's messy and it's difficult and the cracks just keep on coming, and it's an art form to mend those cracks. And it is a sacred practice that should not be rushed, practiced out of shame. And I think if I acted out of shame the way I have in past, shame is a big emotion for me, I would delete this episode, which I've filmed a lot of more vulnerable episodes, FYI, that have never made it to the air because I acted out of fear and shame. I didn't want to show that level of vulnerability online, where so many people would be able to actually perceive me, and I couldn't just wear the mask anymore. Once the thing is online, you can't really wear a mask anymore because people know your inner thoughts in a completely different way than if, you're just a random stranger and not someone that they've seen online. So I guess cheers to trying. I hope that you feel worthy in life. And I hope that you know that it's okay if you have no fucking clue what to do next. Honestly. It's okay if you're still lost and you're still struggling and you feel like the hits just keep coming. Because it's not always gonna feel like this philosophical, spiritual, rosy path. You know what? Sometimes it sucks. It's a bitch. You hate things sometimes. And you feel helpless and there's no way out. But there is always a way. I saw like a screenshot of a post on Tumblr. Okay. The screenshot on the post on Tumblr goes a little like this. This guy recounts a story of when he was younger in middle school. And he says, one time when I was really depressed, I emailed my friend, where should I go? Left where nothing is right, or right where nothing is left? And his friend responds, forward. And it's such a random interaction. It was such a random quote, but you know what? Most important lessons in life are that simple. Where do you go? Forward. And as you go, you try and you try and you try again until eventually, somewhere along the way, you figure things out. So, this is me along the way. I haven't hit that somewhere yet, but we're figuring it out. And I hope you give yourself the grace to figure things out too. I feel like I already want to hide from all the vulnerability that I shared in this episode, but we're going to ignore that. And I'm going to say, you guys have a good night. Frankie says, have a good night. If you're not on the video episode, my dog Frankie is with me. You can hear her. Anyways, you guys have a good night or day or morning or whatever it might be. I'll talk to you guys again soon. Thanks for tuning in. Peace out. Bye. Bye. Say bye. Bye, 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 bye.